dream came, and that was to do an animation of the entire Bible, the
So
entire biblical narrative.
before we dig into this iBible, because I love the story, just thinking about it, there's so many things I want to I won't camp on, but a few things I want to point out for our listeners. Just um, you said something earlier, and I think it's important when we begin to talk to people that would say, they're a nonprofit, for example. I always argue that nonprofit is a tax status. The basic principles of biblical business apply to the church. They apply to ministries. They apply to a production company as well as to a manufacturing company. My one thing I've always said is that if you don't have, I don't care what your tax status is, if you don't have more money at the end of the month than you started with, you won't be around very long.
That's right.
So I think I'm listening as you're sharing, Steve, and it encourages me to think about almost a new genre, right? Which is media as mission, because it's really comes down to what your story. I think your heart is obvious that God called you and really convicted you about the world early as an early believer, and that's that missio Dei, the purpose of God. Everything revolves around that. So it really is what's your calling, connected to that. If you're called to be a manufacturer or a lawyer or a teacher, whatever, connected to that. If you're called to be a media producer, connected to that. You've done that. Your story is a great example for people. Whatever God's called you to do, just make sure it's connected to what He's doing, and that's what you've done. So, just a few questions on Pilgrim's Progress. I don't want to get into the details really of how the whole media industry works. Although I'm curious, and I'm not going to.
It would be a podcast for sure.
No doubt. And then there's probably a lot of people that should consider it. They just don't understand it. But one of the things I love about what you're doing is the quality of the work you do, the way you approach it. So many early Christian films, in my experience, have been, frankly, an embarrassment to put out into the marketplace, and put them in the mission field doesn't make that go away. The lack of quality
Exactly.
translates into all languages. But you've had a commitment from the very beginning to do it right, to do it like a top shelf professional. How has that limited what you could do, or do you feel like that's accelerated impact? Because when I hear about stories like people coming to a conference and years later saying, "Hey, I watched the Pilgrim's Progress. It was really impactful for me." That's a great testimony. But how hard was this?
Well, I mean, that could be a podcast. I mean, it nearly killed me, literally. I did end up in intensive care, and the doctor told my wife I was going to die. So it literally almost killed me. I always related it to the burden on my back. And, you talk about, I speak at Christian film festivals, and you want to talk about, the cheese factor in Christian films, right? This is what you're talking about. It's
Yes,
the cheese factor.
that's exactly the right term.
So you have to work within your budget. And I don't think the Pilgrim's Progress animation is very good. And when I was doing interviews, my staff would say, you got to stop saying that. But we only had so much money to do the animation. So if you look at a typical animated film, it's, $50 million. Disney film is $100 million. Independent film is $30 million. We did Pilgrim's Progress for under $2 million. I used to joke around that our Pilgrim's Progress budget is less than the catering budget of Disney film. Or the, it's not even come close to the overruns. So, but we tried to do everything we could with the budget we had, but not be cheesy. So a script cost X amount of money. If you're going to write your own script, or you're going to pay somebody to write a script, cheese factor doesn't save money. A cheesy film is not less expensive. And so sometimes it can be more expensive. So if you have a good script, and then figuring out what you can do with that budget to do a quality production. And we haven't talked much about iBible yet, but I had a Disney artist in my office a couple months ago, and he said, well, what if you could double the budget to increase the quality? And I says, well, first of all, if I doubled the budget, the average person would barely notice the quality increase, because animation is exponential cost. If you want to increase the quality by 10%, you need to double the budget. It's not double the budget, double the quality. You get about a 10% difference. But I said, if somebody gave me that money, I would ask them, could I spend it on distribution and translation instead of spending it on making the film better? because we have to get our films out there. And this goes back to films not going on the mission field. And like you said, many Christian films shouldn't go on the mission field. You know, they're American. First of all, if they're American based, forget it. If they're cheesy, forget it. You know, and so that takes out what? A good percentage of Christian films. And then other Christian films can get tied up by studios, and so they don't make it on the mission field. And so you have both sides. You have the great quality Christian films making it very difficult to bring to the mission field, and you have the cheesy films that don't belong there. And we tried to create a new pipeline that says, do a film, don't spend more money than you need to, because I want to spend the money getting it out there, but make sure it's an impactful film, and which creative people can make. You don't have to make a cheesy film. And if you got to balance money and missions. You know, like you said, you have to do good business. You have to you have to balance that. I would say that half our money for Pilgrims, well, maybe a third came in through donations, a third came in through internally. We used our own funds, and a third came in through our investors. And I strongly believe in all three. We had skin in the game. You said nonprofit is a status. For us, nonprofit gives us the ability to accept donations. We still have to operate like a business, or we're going to be out of business, right? And we have to and also being a nonprofit means people can raise their own support, can volunteer, and we also have paid staff. So we've really done a blending of all of that. And it's the same with Pilgrims. We have investors, we have skin in the game, and we have donors. And I think that's what works. I want people to have skin in the game. I want them to do that before they go to investors.
No, I think that's a great explanation. It's very much like the way I think about the nonprofit status is that, you know, you have investors. They just sometimes have different approaches, but at the end of the day, it is skin in the game to accomplish a mission, and that's what you're doing. So from Pilgrim's Progress, that you were beginning to head there, and I sort of cut you off a little bit. Into the iBible vision. So because you've got this heart for missions, God's using you in media, and you're doing work there, and then the Pilgrim's Progress hits, and apparently is very, very successful globally.